How's it going? Lighting's a little too dramatic, isn't it? Today I want to go on a little rant about tactical swords. Quite a concept, isn't it? As soon as you see the term tactical, you know immediately it's a marketing gimmick. I highly doubt that there's a single soldier on the entire planet who has or carries a tactical sword. Owning one or several is a different story for, collecting purposes and whatnot. But carrying a tactical sword in the field on duty, I'm gonna press X to doubt that. Obviously, it is really just a marketing gimmick and not supposed to be anything else. Nobody is expected to charge into a gunfight with a sword. But even as a collector's piece, it is kind of curious, isn't it? When it comes to reproductions of historical swords, there's something more to it than just the collecting. That in and of itself is viable. Of course, people collect all kinds of things, right? From the old-fashioned stamps that Grandpa would collect to action figures and perfume bottles. There's so many things that serve no practical purpose. You just collect them because you like them, whatever, that's always the case. But when it comes to reproductions of historical swords, there's also the aspect of connecting with history in some way, recreating parts of physical history, if you will, right? There's something interesting about that. And of course, there's also the angle of using them for historical martial arts. But a tactical sword is specifically designed to give the impression of something that could conceivably be used in the modern military, postmodern military, or in the near future or something like that. It's quite often, like a hypothetical zombie apocalypse scenario and stuff like that. Now, of course, I'm needlessly overthinking this, just to acknowledge that. This is just something cool for people to spend their money on that they don't need, along with all the other things they don't need that they're supposed to spend money on, right? But even within that framework, a tactical sword is kind of funny. The thing is, history has already laid all the groundwork. The heavy lifting has been done. We know what properly designed swords are like in terms of ergonomics, in terms of things like hand protection and blade shape to optimize cutting performance, blah, 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 the right balance, this and that, the other. Everything that goes into making a sword, designing it and making it. So many ways to optimize swords, to choose the right thickness and the right taper and make the balance just so that it's a really good compromise between striking power and speed and agility and all of that. You have so many ways to make the handle particularly efficient and comfortable, like you can bevel it in all kinds of ways. There are plenty of different takes on grip wraps that are both practical and aesthetically appealing. But then along comes the tactical sword that is basically just a flat bar of steel with a rough secondary bevel and blocky plastic handle scales slapped onto it. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are some tactical swords that are well made. Back in the day, around 2010 or so, I used to have a Zombie Slayer by Valiant Armory. That had a much better blade geometry, directly inspired by historical blades, and the handle scales were okay. Taking a look at the pictures from then to refresh my memory, would I even really call that okay now? Well, let's call it underwhelming. I did like that, but if you compare it directly to a historical longsword, it's inferior in every way. Really, the only positive thing you can say is because it doesn't have a proper guard, it's slightly easier to carry, although the scabbard is designed to be worn on the back like an edgelord anyway, in which case it doesn't even really matter. And I've handled some really bad examples too. I mean, not truly terrible, not total garbage, but compared to historical designs, really underwhelming. And just everything that those kinds of swords do, those fail to do, in terms of, again, practicality and ergonomics and handling and everything really, edges in particular, they tend to have really terrible edges, to the point where even if you wanted to market them as something useful for bushcraft or whatever, no, they don't cut for shit, quite frankly. Of course, it depends on the price range. You know, the more you pay, generally, the more you get. Generally, there are some exceptions of overpriced junk. But if you look at something like zombie tools, for example, these are really well made. They're nigh indestructible unless you do crazy things like shoot them. Yes, I know. People still referring to that ancient event, but fair enough, it was pretty funny. But the thing is, even though I like zombie tools and have reviewed them positively, I did so with a particular framework in mind. You know, this idea of, okay, this is something that's supposed to be cool, that's designed to be, it's zombie apocalypse themed, right? And within that, like, taking into account what they were trying to achieve, yeah, this is exactly right. Okay. But if I looked at that stuff through the lens of historical weapons, you know, something that you would actually want to use, the rating wouldn't be so high. Like, the handle scales are totally overkill. You don't need full metal handle scales for this. You know, wood is just fine, or to stick with a theme like G10 or something like that, the way, you know, tactical swords usually do. And it's also way thicker than it needs to be. I mean, again, to be borderline indestructible, that's great and all, but you know, as a fighting tool, even against zombies, it's not really a good idea to slap that much extra weight on it, because it would be exhausting. If you have an entire lineup of the undead, you have to dispatch like 50 of them in a row. Yeah, you're gonna be a little exhausted, and you may not get enough food and water and all of that. So that's not really a good thing. You want things to be optimized, to be as efficient as possible, to require as little energy as possible to get the job done. I've talked about this more than enough and demonstrated its effectiveness. I'm not going to start that old spiel again. So there are well-made themed swords like that, whether it be tactical or zombie themed or whatever. And in that case, sure, I get it, for collecting purposes and just to have fun with it, just to, you know, cut water bottles such as Tommy mats or whatever, you know, things we engage in that the normies would look at like, what the hell? And I have a suspicion that the way normies look at gun nuts, outside of America at least, that's probably the way gun nuts look at people with tactical swords, right? There are weirder and even more pointless things to spend your money on, but, you know, as long as someone somewhere enjoys it, that's a good enough reason, right? It's just the poorly made ones, really the only thing they have going for them, other than the novelty, is the price. They tend to be fairly cheap. But they don't even look good to put on the wall because they are designed to be minimalist. And don't get me started on minimalism. Especially when it comes to interior design, I despise minimalism. I mean, just look at old, beautiful Victorian homes. Anyway, so in short, I've owned tactical swords. I get the idea, but I also don't get it. You know, like, I also don't see the point, even within the framework of being a sword nerd and collecting these things for basically no reason other than they're cool. Even within that context, I don't quite get it. How do you feel about tactical swords? Let me know what you think. In the meantime, if you haven't yet, feel free to do a tactical subscribe maneuver and hit the tactical like button. Yeah, I'll stop now. Thanks for watching. Take care.